Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today, we're going to be diving into the world of Bitcoin. It's a fascinating world of decentralized finance, and we're going to be talking about how this digital currency went from just a fringe idea to this like global phenomenon.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that, it didn't emerge during a time of prosperity. It was actually born back in 2008, right in the middle of the global financial crisis, almost like a response to the flaws of the traditional financial system.
Right? Yeah, it's almost like it was meant to be, right? Like this mysterious figure, Satoshi Nakamoto, kind of emerges from the shadows with this radical idea, like a digital currency that's free from the control of banks and governments. I mean, what do you think that says about like the state of things back then?
I think it speaks volumes about the erosion of trust that was happening in these centralized institutions. People were looking for alternatives, like ways to protect their assets and regain control over their finances. And Bitcoin, with its promise of decentralization, it kind of offered a compelling solution at the time.
It really did shake things up. So how does it actually work? I mean, we hear decentralized digital currency, but like, what does that actually mean in practice?
Well, imagine a network of computers all connected and communicating with each other, working together to maintain a secure and transparent ledger of transactions. That's the essence of Bitcoin. It's not controlled by any single entity, but rather by this distributed network of participants.
Okay, so it's kind of like this giant digital public square where everyone can see what's going on. And that's where blockchain comes in, right? I've heard that term thrown around a lot. But I'm still a little bit fuzzy on like the details.
Yeah, so think of blockchain as like a giant public notebook, but digital. Every Bitcoin transaction is recorded in this notebook. They're grouped into blocks, and each block is linked to the previous one using these complex math problems, forming an unbreakable chain. That's where the term blockchain comes from.
Okay, so it's like this chain of digital records all linked together in a way that can't be tampered with.
Exactly. And because this ledger is shared across the entire network, it's virtually impossible to alter or manipulate any of the records. This ensures transparency and security without relying on a central authority like a bank.
That's pretty revolutionary, right? It's like cutting out the middleman and giving power back to the people. I could see why that would be appealing, especially after the 2008 financial crisis.
Absolutely. The idea of a trustless system where you don't need to rely on third parties
Hmm.
to verify transactions was and still is incredibly powerful.
So walk me through those early days. How did this like radical idea start to take shape in the real world?
Well, on January 3rd, 2009, the very first block of the Bitcoin blockchain was mined, marking the birth of this cryptocurrency.
Yeah, I bet it was pretty quiet back then, just like a bunch of tech enthusiasts kind of tinkering in the digital shadows. But then things started to get interesting, right? I mean, who can forget that legendary pizza purchase?
Ah, yes, the infamous pizza purchase of 2010. Someone paid 10,000 bitcoins for two pizzas. Today, that amount of bitcoin would be worth a fortune. It's a story that perfectly encapsulates the early potential and perhaps the naivety surrounding Bitcoin's future value.
Oh man, can you imagine ordering those pizzas today? You'd probably need a whole team of lawyers and accountants just to handle the transaction. But it did show that people were willing to use Bitcoin for real-world transactions even back then.
It was a proof of concept, a testament to Bitcoin's potential as a medium of exchange. But the journey from those early days to mainstream adoption has been anything but smooth sailing. We've seen dramatic price swings, periods of intense hype, and of course, plenty of skepticism.
Yeah, it's been quite the roller coaster ride. What were some of the key events that kind of shaped Bitcoin's journey and contributed to its volatile nature?
Well, one of the most fascinating and often misunderstood aspects of Bitcoin is this concept of housing. This event, which occurs roughly every 4 years, plays a significant role in shaping Bitcoin's price dynamics.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Break down this whole halving thing for me. How does it work and why does it impact the price so much?
Imagine a system where the rate at which new Bitcoins are created is cut in half every 4 years. This is precisely what happens with Bitcoin. It's a built-in mechanism to control inflation and create scarcity.
So it's like this controlled supply shock that's intentionally designed to make Bitcoin more valuable over time.
Exactly. As fewer Bitcoins are created and demand continues to rise, the price naturally tends to increase. It's a fundamental economic principle of supply and demand at play.
It's almost like digital gold, becoming more scarce and precious with each passing halving. I can see why that would impact investors looking for alternative assets.
Absolutely. The concept of digital scarcity is a major draw for many Bitcoin proponents, but it's also worth noting that this scarcity, combined with the relatively small number of Bitcoins in circulation, contributes to its price volatility.
Yeah, it's like a high-stakes poker game where the chips are becoming more valuable, but the stakes are also getting higher with every hand.
That's a great analogy. It captures the excitement, the risk, and the potential rewards that come with investing in this emerging asset class. And as Bitcoin's value started to rise, it attracted more than just investors. It also caught the attention of those operating outside the law.
You're talking about the Silk Road, right? That infamous online black market where people could buy and sell just about anything anonymously using Bitcoin.
Exactly. The Silk Road incident in the early 2010s really tarnished Bitcoin's reputation. It fueled the perception that Bitcoin was primarily a tool for criminals and illicit activities.
Yeah, I remember hearing about that back then. It felt like Bitcoin was being demonized in the media, portrayed as this like shady underworld currency. Did that perception have a lasting impact on its adoption?
It definitely had a chilling effect in those early days. Regulators and law enforcement agencies were understandably concerned about the potential for money laundering and other criminal activities. But as Bitcoin matured and its technology became better understood, that perception began to shift. So how did Bitcoin overcome that initial stigma and start to gain legitimacy in the eyes of the mainstream? Well, a few key things happened. First, the underlying technology, the blockchain, started to gain recognition for its potential beyond just cryptocurrency. People began to see its applications in areas like supply chain management, voting systems, and even digital identity verification.
So it's like people started to see the forest for the trees, realizing that the blockchain itself had value beyond just Bitcoin.
Precisely. And as blockchain technology gained traction, so did the companies and developers building on top of it. This led to the emergence of a whole ecosystem of cryptocurrencies exchanges and blockchain-based services.
Like Bitcoin planted the seed, and suddenly this whole digital garden started to sprout up around it.
That's a great way to put it. And as this ecosystem expanded, it attracted more investors, entrepreneurs, and even established institutions.
Speaking of institutions, when did we start to see major players like PayPal kind of dipping their toes into the Bitcoin waters?
That was a pivotal moment. In 2020, PayPal announced that it would allow users to buy, sell, and hold Bitcoin on its platform. This was a game changer because it exposed millions of people to Bitcoin who might not have otherwise considered it.
Yeah, it was like Bitcoin suddenly went from being this like niche techie thing to something you could access with like a few clicks on your phone.
Exactly. And it opened the floodgates for other companies to follow suit. We saw companies like MicroStrategy and MassMutual adding Bitcoin to their balance sheets, essentially making a bet on its long-term value.
It's like the corporate world started to take Bitcoin seriously, not just as a speculative asset, but as like a potential store of value like digital gold,
And with that increased adoption came the inevitable scrutiny from governments.
right? Because if there's one thing governments don't like, it's something challenging their control over money. Did we see any like major regulatory crackdowns during this period?
We certainly did. China, for example, cracked down hard on Bitcoin mining in 2021, citing concerns about energy consumption and financial stability.
And even in the U.S., we saw President Biden signing a bill to regulate crypto in 2023. It seems like governments were trying to figure out how to fit this like square peg of Bitcoin into the round hole of traditional finance.
It was definitely a period of uncertainty and adjustment. Governments were grappling with how to regulate this decentralized, borderless technology without stifling innovation.
But despite these regulatory hurdles, Bitcoin's price continued to climb, didn't it? It seemed like every time someone tried to put up a roadblock, Bitcoin just found a way to drive right through it.
That's the thing about Bitcoin. It's designed to be resilient, to operate independently of any central authority. Attempts to control it often have the unintended consequence of strengthening its appeal.
It's like trying to control the internet. You can try to regulate it, but you can't shut it down.
Exactly. And that resilience was on full display in 2022, when the crypto market experienced a major shakeup with the collapse of FTX.
FTX, that massive cryptocurrency exchange that went belly up, wasn't that a huge blow to the entire crypto industry?
It was a significant setback, no doubt. The collapse of FTX eroded trust in centralized exchanges and sent shockwaves through the market, causing Bitcoin's price to plummet along with many other cryptocurrencies.
So as a reminder that even though Bitcoin itself is decentralized, the ecosystem around it still has these like centralized points of vulnerability.
And a valuable lesson learned, for sure. But amidst the fallout, there was a silver lining on the horizon, the long-awaited approval of a Bitcoin ETF.
For ELI5 for me, what's a Bitcoin ETF and why was it such a big deal?
An ETF, or exchange-traded fund, is essentially a basket of assets that you can buy and sell on a stock exchange. A Bitcoin ETF allows investors to gain exposure to Bitcoin without actually having to buy and hold the cryptocurrency directly.
So it's like buying shares in a company that owns a bunch of Bitcoin.
That's a good way to think about it. And the approval of the first Bitcoin ETF in January 2024 was a watershed moment because it opened up Bitcoin investing to a much wider audience.
It was like Bitcoin finally got a seat at the table in the traditional financial world,
And that mainstream acceptance combined with growing concerns about inflation and geopolitical instability fueled a renewed surge in demand for Bitcoin.
which brings us to the wild card in this whole saga, Donald Trump and his unexpected return to the political stage.
Ah, yes, the Trump factor. His victory in the 2024 presidential election, coupled with his vocal support for Bitcoin, sent shockwaves through the crypto market.
I remember that. Bitcoin's price skyrocketed after his election. It was like the entire crypto community was holding its breath, waiting to see what he would do.
And he didn't disappoint. His promises of a Bitcoin golden age and favorable regulations sent Bitcoin's price soaring toward $100,000.
It was like a self-fulfilling prophecy. The mere expectation of positive government policies was enough to drive a massive surge in demand.
It just goes to show the immense influence that political figures can have on the perception and adoption of emerging technologies like Bitcoin.
But Trump's relationship with Bitcoin wasn't always smooth sailing, was it?
Not quite. While his initial stance was positive, his subsequent actions like releasing his own meme coin and engaging in trade wars introduced new elements of volatility into the market.
It's almost like he couldn't resist playing with fire, even when he knew the risks.
Perhaps. But regardless of his intentions, Trump's actions highlighted the fact that even with increased mainstream adoption and political support, Bitcoin remains a highly speculative and unpredictable asset.
It's a wild ride, that's for sure. But looking back at the past 16 years, it's remarkable to see how far Bitcoin has come.
From a fringe idea to a global phenomenon, Bitcoin has challenged our fundamental notions of money, finance, and power.
Yeah, it sparked a revolution, a decentralized movement that empowers individuals and disrupts the status quo. And the story is far from over.
The future of Bitcoin is uncertain, but one thing is clear. It has irreversibly changed the financial landscape, and its influence will continue to be felt for years to come.
So where do we go from here? What does the future hold for Bitcoin? Will it become like the dominant global currency replacing the dollar?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? There are certainly some who believed Bitcoin is destined to become the future of money. They point to its decentralized nature, its limited supply, and its growing acceptance as evidence of its inevitability.
Yeah, it's certainly tempting to imagine a world where we're no longer reliant on these like centralized institutions and governments to control our money.
It's a powerful idea, and one that resonates deeply with those who value freedom and autonomy. But there are also significant challenges and uncertainties that Bitcoin needs to overcome.
Like what? What are some of those roadblocks that could prevent Bitcoin from achieving mainstream adoption?
Well, scalability is a major hurdle. The Bitcoin network can only process a limited number of transactions per second, which can lead to delays and higher fees during periods of high demand. This is something developers are actively working on, but it remains a technical challenge.
Right, so it's like a highway that can only handle a certain amount of traffic. If everyone decides to hit the road at the same time, things start to get congested.
That's a great analogy. And then there's the issue of volatility. Bitcoin's tight swings can be extreme, making it a risky investment for those seeking stability. This volatility can also hinder its adoption as a day-to-day currency. As merchants may be hesitant to accept a form of payment, that could fluctuate significantly in value.
Yeah, it's like trying to buy groceries with a stock that's bouncing up and down like a yo-yo. You never know what you'll actually end up paying.
Exactly. And then there's the regulatory landscape, which is still evolving. Governments around the world are trying to figure out how to classify Bitcoin, how to tax it, and how to prevent its use for illicit activities. This regulatory uncertainty can create both opportunities and risks for investors and businesses operating in the crypto space.
It feels like Bitcoin is this disruptive force that's forcing governments to rethink their traditional approaches to finance.
It's definitely shaking things up, and how governments choose to respond to this challenge will have a major impact on Bitcoin's future trajectory.
So what does this all mean for the average person? Should they be rushing out to buy Bitcoin? Or is it still too risky?
It's important to remember that Bitcoin is still a relatively young and experimental technology. Its future is uncertain, and there are inherent risks involved. Anyone considering investing in Bitcoin should do their own research, understand the risks, and invest only what they can afford to lose.
So it sounds like Bitcoin isn't for the faint of heart. But for those who are willing to embrace the volatility and the uncertainty, it offers a tantalizing glimpse into a future where money is decentralized and controlled by the people.
It's a compelling vision.
Yeah.
And whether or not Bitcoin ultimately achieves its full potential, it has already sparked a revolution in the way we think about money and finance. It has forced us to question the role of central banks, the nature of value, and the possibilities of decentralized technologies.
It's definitely been an incredible journey so far. And you know what? I have a feeling this is just the beginning.
I think you're right. The story of Bitcoin is still being written, and who knows what the next chapter will hold.
That's the beauty of it all, isn't it? The future is uncertain, but the possibilities are endless. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Bitcoin.
It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you.
And to all of you listening out there, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep your minds open to the possibilities of this ever-evolving world of digital finance.